This section is all about reusability, and one of those factors of reusability is making sure that your content within your component is not baked into it. And that's exactly what this lecture is going to be about. And really, in many ways, our focus here is we're not going to go into all of the structure of MVC, which is a very, very popular design pattern. And React, in many ways, acts as an MVC of the visual layer. But we really don't want our actual model, our actual content, our actual data, if it's database data, if it's strings, whatever content it is, we don't want them baked into our components because we want our components to be reusable. So to do that, we want to extract our data and really make our application as dynamic as we can that way. In this lecture, we're going to start extracting our model data outside of our menu. All right, so let's give a name to this let, obviously. Let's call it a footer model because we're going to take this model and we're going to move it into our client so that way we'll be able to recognize what it actually is. So we have here our portfolio model, and let me just go ahead here and set up our footer one. And I'm going to take our footer model and let's start by just sending it into our footer. So I'm going to call this data and I'm going to send in our footer model. Okay, now that we have that, let's go into our footer and start figuring out how do we deal with this data. So as we said, we have here two types of data. One type of data that will have in the content a string, and another type of data where it will have in the content in the underlying child it will have an array, right? So we have an array or we have content. Now, in our case, it's really important for us to secure that the content is valid, but we're going to take a look at how do you secure validity of content in this application after we set it up and configure it and create it. So let's go ahead into our footer, and in our footer I'm going to go into my render, but this time around, instead of rendering out this full instance, I want to kind of like isolate where are our components. So we have here one component and we have another component down below which is in this very similar structure. Now we want to actually turn them into components, so I'm going to go ahead and create another class. I'm not going to even export it. I'm going to call this class, how about we'll call this text footer or text component. It doesn't have to have the word footer in it because it's going to be internal here. So let's call it text or simple text footer. Let's just call it text footer. Text footer, again, it's going to extend our React component. Not only is it going to extend the React component, it's also going to do the exact same thing by rendering. But what we're going to do is we're going to capture just that structure that we need right here. So I'm going to go ahead and just copy it for a minute. And let's see what is the dynamic elements inside of here. So first of all, whenever we're going to actually get to that footer content, we're going to send it in. If we take a look at our client, what we're going to do is we're going to send in only the chunk that's related, which basically is our title and our content. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my footer and I'm going to change here to just replace that to be this props title. And I'm going to go inside of here, and I'm basically going to put here are this.props.content. Now, I'm assuming that the content is valid and it's already a string, and this is the content that we want to place inside. The logic flow of checking if it's the right one to call it will happen inside of our footer structure. So now that we set that up, we could go ahead and just delete that one from the row just so we're done. We know that we're done with it. Next item is let's go ahead and implement the structuring logic that would happen for those UI elements or the more complex data type. So I'm going to go ahead and create here another class, and I'm going to call it complex footer, and it's going to extend our React. Let's just copy paste. So it's gonna extend our React component. It's not gonna render this baby. Let's go ahead and just copy everything that is inside of that item. So if I go ahead here and I copy all this baby, chunk it right out, and paste it right in here. Now, by the way, just when I was doing this, one thing that I realized and noticed that there is kind of usability that I could recreate here. All of this is the same. The only difference is really what happens in this area where we have here a paragraph or we have this more complex structure. So we could go and maybe create a facilitator class for this and use that facilitator class. That makes a lot of sense. So we could create here some sort of class. Let's say we'll call it footer element extends React component as well. But this time around, we're going to render. And by the way, did I close here everything? That looks right. Did I close this one? Well, did I? Oh no, it looks like I didn't. Look at that. You see, and then we would have an error, and that would be so embarrassing, and it would be horrible. Okay, so let's continue. Let's create a footer element, or even let's just call it element, because we're assuming that this will only live within the bounds of this footer region. So we'll know what an element is because we're inside of this region. Okay, so what we want to do is I'm going to go ahead and copy this structure, and let's see what is the construct that we would probably have here. So first of all, title, beautiful. And here we would probably put inside just children. Props.children. And now that we've set this basic construct that always repeats itself, I could literally, and let's just make sure that we're doing it in the way that we're supposed to doing it. So we're returning the item, we're closing out our class, just double checking this class is closed, and we have here an element. And now we could go ahead and just replace all of that with just saying element and just placing the content here to be basically basically just what's inside of here. Or we might need to also pass in that paragraph into that text element, so we might need to do that. We might need to revisit that. But the last thing also that we're going to have to do is we want to pass through that title. So I'm going to just go ahead here and set here a title equals this props.title. So what I literally did here is I created a very basic element, which is going to make it so much easier for me to pass through our content. So in this case, now all of this logic structure could change as well. And instead of this logic structure, we're going to put our element, and then we're going to place this with the actual content itself. And in this case, our content itself is going to be everything in this UL here. And I could take this UL, copy it out, and place it right here. So also the UL, when it's a complex footer element, is going to be rendering the exact same type of structuring. Now, there's a lot of ways for me to be able to do this. For one is, we're using here our UL in our element, so we're sending in that UL to our element as well, which works for us. That works perfectly. This is an extended, basically everything is going to go in here. And with that said, so for our footer text, all we really have to do when we think about it, if we want to keep that paragraph, we could just set our paragraph and put that paragraph in, because really in this case it's going to take the content of whatever element, and it's going to wrap it with a P and then send it to our element, which works brilliantly for our purpose. So now that we've set and created these structures, we could go, our complex footer still needs to be created. But for now, let's go ahead back into our footer element and figure out how to build this out. So I'm going to just go into it and let's figure out. So first of all, we already have a module data that's coming through, but I really want to test things out. So let's start off by just putting one of the elements in. So let's say we start with our text footer. And with our text footer, I'm just going to go ahead and set here a new text footer. And I'm going to send in, what is it expecting? It's expecting a title. It's expecting a title. It's expecting content. And in our case, what we could do is we could take our properties out of the module. So basically in this case, I'm going to go here into my text footer and I'll set here a title. And let's say just for until we really test everything out, let's just type here Ben for the title, and for our content, I'm going to put here it's me. Okay? And let's just see that we're not getting errors. That's a good place to start from. Let's just fix any errors if we have any errors going on. So first of all, am I seeing any errors? No. But I'm also not seeing our footer element. So let's see, why aren't we seeing it? We're seeing only the bottom part, but we're not seeing those elements inside of here that we really wanted to, even though we're not getting an error. So that's already a good start. So let's take a look at our text footer. And in our text footer, we're rendering the element. The element is literally this stuff. Now, one thing that is probably going on here that is not working, and if we just take a look at it, let's just inspect this area here, really go into our footer. Let's see what's actually going on here above. We have our container. and the container has a row. Okay, so far so good, but the row is empty. So okay, so we know that the row is not getting rendered. So why not? Why not indeed? So let's think. Well, a good reason could be is because we never put it into the footer. I thought we did. We must have put it somewhere else. And there we go, we put it somewhere else. That would explain it. So let me just undo whatever we did right here. We must have deleted, there's something that we didn't want to delete. Let's just test it out and see what damage did I do. So in my footer itself, I'm going to go right in there, and this time around I'm going to send a footer, and let's see what happens. There you go, then it's me. And if I go ahead and I add another footer element, then we'll get 3 it's me's on here. Yay! All right, so in the next lecture, we'll continue down and actually connect all this data to be dynamic, but we're definitely getting close. In this lecture, we continue down the path of making each and every one of our components more reusable, more dynamic by extracting the model data out of our menu. In the next lecture, we're going to use the JSX and ES6 spread features as we continue down this process of making everything dynamic.